boasts at 9:45. Before then, inheritance, and James Moore continues to investigate how something that's been inherited can have an effect on someone's life. Today, it's the story of Byron's Gondolier.
It could be a plot of land, or just an old box of letters. It could be your grandfather's grandfather clock. But at some point in life, most of us will inherit something. For Claudia Ayliffe, as secretary in a car sales room, it was a ring. No one in her family had paid much attention to it, but for Claudia, it was the starting point in an historical quest that has taken her from the dark canals of Venice to the deathbed of Lord Byron.
Didst e'er see a gondola? For fear you should not, I'll describe it to you exactly. 'Tis a long covered boat that's common here, carved at the prow, built lightly but compactly, rowed by 2 rowers, each called gondolier. It glides along the water looking blackly, just like a coffin clapped in a canoe, where none can make out what you say or do.
There it is. No, well, look at the state of this one here. It's frightening.
Claudia's story begins in one of London's most famous cemeteries at Kensal Green, where the Victorians interred their great and their good and their most notorious. Claudia has spent years researching this ring and discovered a fascinating connection with the poet Lord Byron and his personal gondolier, Tita.
This is Tita's grave, and his wife's buried here as well.
What's the story behind this grave? Where did this man come from? What did he do?
Well, he was born in Venice in 1798. Falcieri, as far as we were, is a Venetian name. It does seem to solely originate there. And he was born into a family of gondoliers. His father, Vincenzo, was a gondolier, and he had 2 brothers as well. And that was their life. They were the gondoliers of Venice.
So what is it that's brought you here to this grave? What's your part in this story?
I inherited a memorial ring, and it's set to Sarah Falcieri, who was Tita's widow, and she died on the 10th of March 1877.
I've never seen a ring like this. I mean, it's a gold ring, presumably, but with the band around it, it's quite thick. The band around it is all in black. Now, you say it's a memorial ring. I mean, we don't have such things these days. What was a memorial ring?
They were basically made after somebody died as a memory of them, and particularly had a lock of hair, so you could wear this ring and carry a part of them round with you wherever you went, and their memory was always with you. And then they'd be passed down through the family as a remembrance.
And you've spent years, haven't you, researching this ring that you inherited?
I have, yes.
Where did your research begin to find out who this ring had belonged to and who this strange man Tita was?
Well, most of the research began specifically with Lord Byron, because that is where his name first appears. Byron went to Venice in 1816. He didn't actually meet Tita until May of 1818, when he finally moved to the Palazzo Mocenigo on the Grand Canal. And Tita and his family were the resident gondoliers there, because a lot of grand families, they would have had their own gondoliers or gondola that they would have employed solely for their own purposes, like having your own chauffeur. And the family were already there, and Byron wanted a gondolier, and he presumably, while he was there, started to use them because they were resident there. And eventually he paid Tita's father a sum of money to buy him out of the family business and keep him as his own gondolier. And that's really where it all began. And certainly when Byron left Venice eventually, about 1821, Tita considered him, he was his master. He went with him wherever he wants. So he turned his back on Venice and left Venice to follow his master. And they went down through mainland Italy and ultimately ended up in Greece and the island of Missolonghi.
Where Byron died? Where
Byron died, and Byron actually died in Tita's arms.
Tita, Claudia's ancestor, became Byron's constant companion, muse and friend. It was in Greece that Byron died, in Tita's arms. Not from a wound in battle, but less gloriously, from marsh fever. Claudia's interest led her to another ring, the one that Tita had taken from Byron's hand on his deathbed and brought back to England. Well, it's a beautifully grand Georgian building, isn't it? I mean, you can picture... That ring is now in the John Murray Archive in London's Mayfair. originally the home of Byron's publisher.
I know who these are. The BBC crew or
It would be, yes,
crew.
indeed. Good afternoon.
But I'm not allowed to say anything to you because Virginia is the only one who's allowed to speak on my behalf. She's our archivist.
John Murray VIII directed us to his wife, Virginia Murray, who took out a small piece of faded paper wrapped around a tiny little ring. The ring that Claudia's great-great-great-grandfather had taken from Lord Byron's hand.
This is the little ring. It was given to Byron in 1807 in Cambridge. Eddleston was a little choir boy of about 15 who Byron had become obsessed with. Byron befriended him, and then Eddleston gave Byron this tiny little ring with the verse, which I've got somewhere.
It's a very, very fine band of what I presume is gold, and set into it there's a heart-shaped semi-precious stone. It's a cornelian, yes. And why was this ring so special?
To me, it represents, it's a witness to Byron's life, and right to the last moment. And certainly it then represents something to my family, because obviously Tita took the ring and he brought it back to England, and it stayed in the family until the 1970s, which was when it was finally auctioned at Sotheby's. So it's seen an incredible history, that ring. The ring isn't the only item that came back with Tita. As well as taking the ring off of his finger, he also cut a lock of his hair. I don't know if this is the whole lock of hair, because I know that a piece of it may have been given away to somebody else, but certainly this is a remaining section of Byron's hair that was cut by Tita from the body in Missolonghi. And it's inside a piece of paper which has Capella de Lord Byron written on it, which may well be Tita's writing, because it's written in Italian.
It's still in the original piece of paper that it was folded into, presumably very, very soon after Byron died, probably within hours or even minutes.
Yes.
After Byron's death, Tita was offered employment by the Disraeli family. Benjamin Disraeli, the romantically inclined Prime Minister, was fascinated by anything or anyone who had a connection with his great hero, Lord Byron.
He kind of hero worshipped Byron, absolutely, and when they met Byron's servant, he was absolutely overjoyed.
Jessie Binns from the National Trust showed us around Disraeli's home, Hughenden Manor.
A lovely little quote from a letter that he wrote home from Malta to his brother, who says, Clay is, this was the person that Tita was travelling with, Clay is immensely improved and a very agreeable companion indeed, with such a valet, Giovanni by name. Byron died in his arms and his mustachios touch the earth. Withal mild as a lamb, though he has 2 daggers always about him. And I just love that. It kind of gives that sense of excitement that he felt at meeting this person who actually had that contact with Byron. And we hear that Tita actually gave Disraeli a lock of Byron's hair that he'd had from Byron when he died.
And still today here in Hughenden, I see you've got a picture of Tita on the wall, and there he is with his 2 daggers in his belt.
Oh, he looks like such a bandit, doesn't he? He's absolutely great. I love this picture so much, and it really gives that sense of kind of excitement and adventure that was very much about the young Disraeli and very much part of his kind of worship of Byron and this great travel and great adventure. And Tita actually became a great favourite of the whole Disraeli family. He never actually came here to Hughenden. He may have come to visit, but he worked at Bradenham, where Disraeli's father lived, and became a servant of Disraeli's father. And the whole family had such an affection for him. Disraeli's father took him to London with them. We hear they kind of spoke Italian together. And also Disraeli's sister, Sarah, wrote to Disraeli one time, kind of coming up for Christmas, please don't bring anybody with you because we've promised Tita a holiday. You know, so they're prepared to suspend their whole kind of Christmas season so that their servant can have some time off. You know, it just shows how much of an impression, you know, he'd made on the family.
How do you feel when somebody like Claudia turns up? How do you respond to that?
I find it so exciting, because it's one of those things that actually brings this place to life, that it's not just a building preserved in aspic and full of kind of heirlooms and antiques, but it's actually something that's living, that's still alive, and that still has these stories that are out there, if only we can find them. And I wish Claudia the best of luck with her research, because I would love to know the final piece of this jigsaw. It's such a great story, and it's only one of so many stories, like so many National Trust properties. These stories are almost kind of ingrained into the fabric of the building, and once you can kind of prize them out, it just brings the whole place to life. I love it.
And the history that we've traditionally been taught is always the history of the masters, of the rulers.
Very much so.
Not of the servants.
No, but I think actually that's the story that a lot of people nowadays can relate to. It's the story that has most to do with our everyday lives. And there's such a great appetite out there, especially for people finding out who their ancestors were and their own family history. And a lot of people nowadays are finding that their ancestors would have been in service at some of these big houses. It was so widespread. There were so many people involved in it. And I think those are the stories that it's nice to kind of pull out and draw out and make available for everyone to share.
By a strange coincidence, Claudia's home in High Wycombe is not far from Hughenden. As well as a sanctuary for rescued budgies, Claudia's home is filled with models of gondolas, pictures of Venice, and a fine portrait of Tita himself. Since Claudia inherited that small ring, it seemed to me that her great-great-great-grandfather's story had taken over her life.
It has, yes. Tiny little pieces of the jigsaw came together. Nothing would happen for a while, and then all of a sudden you'd find one little fact or find out that there was some source material in one dusty library somewhere. And you'd pick up the thread and it would start to unravel, and all these other things would suddenly appear, suddenly finding handwritten documents by your ancestor in the British Library, and finding these Italian documents and things that relate to Byron and things like that. And the whole perspective, it's just, you can't imagine the amount of things that are out there, and I'm sure there are plenty more other things out there waiting to be found as well.
How much time have you given to this over the years?
I absolutely dread to think. I mean, I pretty much every day something else has happened. So if it isn't...
Every day?
Well, I certainly think about it every day, and if I'm dropping an email to somebody or checking the back catalogue of a library, or suddenly find out there was a magazine printed in the 70s which mentioned him or something like that. So it's an enormous jigsaw with lots of very tiny pieces, and little tiny pieces get added all the time. And there are still gaps out there, so I'm still on the hunt. I don't know where it's going to end, and I just let it take me wherever it goes. I kind of feel like this is my project, this is my property, really. He's all mine, you know.
It's more than a project, though, isn't it? It's your life.
Yes. Well, yes, it has rather taken over, so I'm hoping it's going to culminate in a book one day. As I've gone along and as I've been doing the research, I've been putting it into a book format. So every time I add something new, and this book's about 170-odd pages now, it's just taken over. It's just, when I look at it like that, I can actually see how much has happened.
What do you think it is that's really caught your imagination and your heart? It's
DNA, it's genetics. I feel I've got something to live up to. This is my family history, and I feel like I owe it to him, really, because he never really talked about his life, and he never wrote it down, and all these little fragments have been recorded in their own way but never put together. So this is my job to write about him and to put it all together so everyone can know about him. And I feel like you know, he kind of watches over you, and you know he's kind of watching in the background and seeing what you're doing.
Inheritance was presented by James Moore and produced by Neil George. Next week it's the story of Matthew and why he ended up driving a tank to France. In a moment on 198 Longwave Weave, the daily service, whilst on FM it's a little more rhythm and blues as Jules Holland continues reading from his autobiography in our Book of the Week.
Thursdays are funny on BBC.